One of Australia's most baffling mysteries is being re-examined. It involves the body of an unknown man found dead on a South Australian beach in 1948. And finally, the South Australian Attorney-General has granted conditional approval to exhume the remains of the so-called Somerton man, hoping finally to figure out who he is and what happened.
Now, this follows a year-long investigation by journalist Fiona Ellis-Jones, who joins us in the studio. A warning, though, that this story does contain images of a deceased person. Fiona, so we don't know much about him. What do we know?
Very little, Fauzia and Josh. Thanks for having me. I guess when it comes to the baffling mystery of the Somerton man, what we do know are the bare facts, and that is that he was found on that beach in Somerton near Adelaide in 1948. It was the first day of summer, so it was quite warm, and two jockeys were walking their horses along the beach, and they saw what looked to be a body of a man. And at first it was assumed that it was a suicide, but as the police began investigating it, they became convinced that there was more to the story. They found this little tiny piece of paper inside his pocket during the mortuary, during the autopsy, that showed this printed word, "Tamam Shud." And they were baffled at the time, and they put a call out to locals in Adelaide and said, what does this mean? They tracked those words down to the final page of a book of Persian poetry called the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. And those words in Farsi mean the end, or it is finished. And then they found that book, and the book had a code inside it. And by this stage, you can imagine that speculation was at fever pitch that this guy was a spy. It was 1948, 49, so they were convinced perhaps he was a communist spy or a Russian spy. But no one ever came forward to claim this man, even though that picture that we saw was widely distributed around the world. His fingerprints were sent to Scotland Yard, the FBI. Nobody knew who this guy was. Fast forward 70 years, and there are renewed calls for an exhumation of his body so that he can have DNA extracted and finally have his identity revealed, hopefully by uploading that DNA to a genealogical site and finding his long-lost family.
Why is this approval so significant? I mean, why has it come now?
There have been two previous applications to have his body exhumed. A person by the name of Professor Derek Abbott, who is with the University of Adelaide, has made those submissions. They were twice rejected by the South Australian Attorney-General, but that was the former AG, that was under John Rowell. And the new Attorney-General, when we spoke to her, Vicky Chapman, she said she would like this case solved, and she granted conditional approval to an exhumation with a catch, and that catch is that the taxpayers of South Australia don't pay for it. So I guess you could say now it is caught up in a bit of a bureaucratic starch as to who funds this exhumation. Professor Abbott puts the cost at about $20,000.
Okay.
Of digging him up and doing the forensic testing and then repatriating the body.
So who might?
Yeah.
Well, it could be a beneficiary, it could be a donor, perhaps crowdfunding, perhaps a different agency within the South Australian government might do it. But to add another layer of complexity to this baffling story, Professor Abbott's reasons for getting this body exhumed and the Somerton man identified are pretty personal, because if his theory is correct, he is actually married to the biological granddaughter of the man.
Oh,
wow.
The mystery
Yes,
continues.
it does. And his theory is that the Somerton man was not a spy. He was in fact a scorned lover who took his own life on the beach. And he has made that assumption by the fact that that little code book I spoke about, the Rubaiyat, it had the number of a local nurse inside, a lady by the name of Jo Thompson. And when the police went to Jo Thompson's house and said, hey, we've got these pictures, do you know this guy? She said no. She said, I've never seen him before. But she had a little boy who was 18 months old at the time, and he shared some very rare genetic features with the Somerton man, including hypodontia of the teeth, which are two missing lateral incisors, and some very strange ears. And Robin's son, who was the little boy, Robin has since passed, so has Jo Thompson. His daughter is Rachel, who's married to Derek.
And is she involved? Sorry, there's
Well,
so many questions.
kind of.
There's got to be a true
like an Agatha Christie novel.
That's how she describes it. It is exactly like that. And she obviously has a very personal cause for wanting the identity of the Somerton man unveiled, because she wants to know her family history. They now have 3 beautiful little children together, and there is a very personal cause for Professor Abbott for having this body exhumed and the man identified. not least the fact that he's dedicated 10 years of his life to the case.
And after 70 years, are they confident that the DNA will be okay in the body?
They are. That's been a sticking point in the past, and the past 2 previous exhumation bids I said were rejected. A lot of scientists at the time said, look, we just don't have the technology to be able to find any DNA traces in his body. He's been buried in formaldehyde for 70 years. But the technology has now changed, because you might remember about 18 months ago there was arrest in the United States of the Golden State Killer.
Yeah.
That was done using something called forensic genealogy. So his DNA was uploaded to a genealogical site and his relatives were identified. If we can get DNA from his bones, which most DNA experts who we've spoken to for the podcast and for Australian Story on Monday night seem to think we can, we'll then be able to upload his DNA to those sites and find his family.
We just got to start by exhuming the body.
Yeah, I mean, they've been pretty specific with us. Apparently bones, teeth, and a part of the ear, that is where they are most likely to be able to find viable DNA.
Wow.
Amazing. Fiona, thank you so much for coming in and chatting with us.
Thanks, Fiona. For more on that, you can subscribe to the Somerton Man Mystery Podcast and tune into Australian Story on ABC on Monday night at 8 p.m.